This is the tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go down into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. MacGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. MacGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella, and she went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. MacGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. Look at him go. Oh, goodness. First, he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. MacGregor? Oh, no. Mr. MacGregor was on his hands and knees, planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened, and he rushed all over the garden, for he'd forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether, if he hadn't unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught on the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. "Try harder, Peter." Mr. MacGregor came up with a sieve, which he had intended to pop down on top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it didn't have so much water in it. Mr. MacGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. After a while, Peter sneezed. "Achoo!" Mr. MacGregor was after him in no time. He tried to put his foot on Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. MacGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he hadn't the least idea which way to go. Also, he was all wet from sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth, she couldn't answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more confused. After a while, he came to a pond where Mr. MacGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He'd heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, He heard the noise of a hoe digging in the dirt. Peter scuttered underneath the brushes. When nothing happened, he came out, climbed up on a wheelbarrow, and looked over. The first thing he saw was Mr. MacGregor digging in the onions. His back was turned towards Peter, but beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and then started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk along behind some black currant bushes. Mr. MacGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter didn't care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. MacGregor hung up the little jacket and shoes for Scarecrow to frighten away the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running and didn't even look behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down on the nice soft sand on the floor of his rabbit hole and he shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in the last couple of weeks. Sorry to say that Peter didn't feel very good during that evening. His mother put him to bed, made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime, she said. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end.